All right, time to get started. So I'll start with the couple of announcements. So our first quiz is slated for a week from tomorrow in class. I'll have a study guide to you by tomorrow for that. I will be able to spend some time probably on the day before the quiz answering questions about any content that we've covered to date. So I'll make sure that I spend at least some time for that. The content for this course is kind of more, it's less problem solving focused than most of my courses and more process focused. So I don't know if we'll need the entire time, but I'll dedicate as much time as people have questions for. So given the study guide, the material on the study guide, let me know as you're going through that, how many questions you think you're going to have. We'll check in on that a bit next week, and we can start to figure out what to do with that for the class based on how much demand I think there will be for review. I also posted the lab that I said I was going to go over and talk to you about yesterday, and decided that your time would be better spent getting started with design. So that is there. I like there to be a little bit of time to work with you on that, and I haven't really done that this quarter. So keep in touch with me as you get started on that process. If there's something that you think that the class would benefit from going over more in detail in class, I am more than willing to do that. But yeah, this quarter is very crunched in terms of the amount of material that we have to cover, especially given that historically, I've been able to assume people have been through 212. And this quarter, about half of you have, and half of you have not. But also historically, nobody learned anything from 212. So it's the wrong place in the curriculum. So I wanna give a little bit more time to the reasoning behind some design patterns. It really belongs in this course. And the reason for that is that you're designing code from scratch yourselves. You can actually see how the design patterns will affect code that you're familiar with because you wrote it. And you can also reap the benefits of it when I ask you to go do something in a later sprint and you have to go through that refactoring or through extension in your code and you see, wow, I already implemented the ability to make that really easy. Whereas what happens in 212 is you get a very prescribed, here are the steps you go through. Hey, look, you did this pattern. And you go, okay, I guess, cool. There's not really a feedback loop for you to see why and what the benefit was from going through that. So I hope to be able to give you that more so in this class than in 212, which is why I advocated for getting rid of it and incorporating it into this course. It just means that it's one more thing that has to happen in this course. It really needs to be a 2-course sequence. But we'll get to that after we get to GitHub and everything else. Always keeps going. Does anyone have any questions or concerns about where we are or what we're doing? Just do keep in mind there were 34 short tutorials. They're phrased kind of like puzzles, kind of like you need to design this GitHub branching layout. And you have a command line, and you can see every time you enter a command in the command line what it does to the repo. So your task is to reproduce the puzzle of the end goal repo by utilizing the commands that you learn.
This is the assignment that's supposed to
Yeah, but it is a little bit longer than just read something, so it will take you a little bit of time. So my recommendation this weekend is rather than trying to get a huge jump start on implementing code, please don't do too much of that yet. We still have a lot of design to go through. We have a lot of feedback to get on some of that design. If I am you, my recommendation is to get through that lab first and foremost, especially before you start trying to utilize or implement interface with Git. As you have time after that, continue going through the design exercises that we were talking about in lab and working with in lab yesterday. Then early next week, you can start getting started on that. And during our Wednesday lab of next week, I will meet with each group in the lab environment to go over your design and really analyze it with you to see if I can offer any suggestions as you do get started implementing and using Git. So that is the plan. Git can use more time, especially in class, than just here's a lab, go learn it. That's the feedback I get every time, and every time I look back at the schedule and try to figure out how to incorporate it in class, it's just like I could not do this well with the time constraints that we have. So I would also like feedback from you at the middle end of the quarter as you start to, what would you do in my shoes about Git versus some of the other things that we cover in class? That's feedback that I could use. And then let me know how thoroughly prepared you feel at the end of this lab to go interface with Git. If you feel great about it after that, let me know any issues that you have throughout the quarter that you can look back and say, that lab didn't teach me that. Or it taught me that, but not well enough to be able to implement it and do it well. Those are the kinds of feedback that I really like in terms of helping to design a better curriculum for the next group that go through this very fun process. Questions or concerns before we dive into continuations of material? Right, let's do it. At the end of our very brief lecture part of the lab yesterday, we were talking about converting user stories into acceptance tests. How do user stories map to what the client is going to want to see out of the very end of the project? So this is the last slide we covered, talking about how to map text to test code. And that is what acceptance tests actually are in practice, is you will take your user stories and they become the acceptance tests that say, if these tests pass, then I have done what you paid me to do. We will talk in more detail about the concepts of behavior-driven design and test-driven development as they relate to the course, but behavior-driven really is talking about utilizing user stories and creating tests from those user stories. Once they are accepted, we know that the customer is satisfied with our implementation of those user stories. And then making sure we go through integration processes as well, integration tests for our components, make sure the interfaces between those components have consistent assumptions, that they communicate with each other in ways that augment the functionality of the project as a whole. It's a great way to meet halfway between the customer and the developer. The customer is getting what they need, and the developer is getting the information they need to intelligently develop what the customer wants. So user stories are not code, nor should they be, but we have a process for converting those user stories down into tasks that allow us to implement what the client is expecting out of interacting with those user stories. Any questions about, we talked about user stories, converting user stories into scenarios, converting scenarios into tasks, and then starting to implement those tasks. Does that process make sense to everybody? Do we have at least some level of being on board with, all right, I'll at least try it out and see how it goes? No arguing with the professor. It's the end of the week. All right.
I got the energy for that.
Yeah, exactly, right. So here is an example, kind of user story scenario in the given, when, then form that is a scenario. So the user story at the top, as a user, I want to add a new movie so that I can share my opinion about that movie. Notice how the story is written from the user's perspective. What if the user cares about when they interact with your system? That's nothing technical, but it's still specific enough as to why the user wants to do it. It should probably say something like, I want to add a new movie by movie title, because otherwise it's a little bit vague. How is the user adding that movie? What should be expected in that field in order to accept that? So it's still a little on the vague side. When I look over your user stories next week, I will be looking for things like that. Are there missing pieces of information that when you convert it into a scenario and a task would lead to ambiguity or missing information? The scenarios that are built from this, remember that one story can map to multiple scenarios. So the scenarios for adding a movie, given that I am on the Rotten Potatoes homepage, when I do whatever add new movie does, when I click add new movie, then I should be on the create new movie page. You can imagine making a task, a technical task out of this that makes sure, and you could write user tests, or you could write unit tests on the ability to make sure that when I do this, I am here. In this situation, when I make this action, I end up in this state. And this defines exactly what that looks like as kind of a middle ground between the client-focused language of the user story and the developer-focused language of a task. When I fill in title with Men in Black and I select PG-13 from rating and I press save changes, then I should be back on the Rotten Potatoes homepage and I should see Men in Black in my added movies, whatever that looks like. Again, there's a bit more information and some context behind this that I don't really have. It should either be built into this or built into a bigger system of that context. But you can see how it relates to the actual process that the user goes through, but it allows us to see the logical flow of the design of this application so that a developer could actually go attach themselves to it and implement it. So the scenario is that middle ground. You can imagine now converting this down into the technical how we do it. How is this going to get created? So, single feature in that user story, it's not overly complicated. But we still need multiple scenarios potentially to describe how it is that we're going to interact with that one feature. So do not overcomplicate your user stories. Complicate it at the scenario step. All right, yeah, user story, single feature, scenarios, multiple potential scenarios that show different ways that a story may unfold, especially if there are options at any point in that user story. Yeah.
For the Discord for the user stories, like when we turn those in, you just want like a PDF submitted to there that has like each user story, the scenario.
Yeah, you can either split the work and just write them all.
So literally type it into the.
Yeah, you could even type it in, or you can create a document and upload that document. Just make sure that there is some terminology or something. These are the beginning of our Sprint 1 user stories. And that way different users, if different members of your group could type individual ones out. It's probably best to think about it and design, here are all the user stories and have them together in a document before that is done. So my recommendation is submit some kind of text document with them in there and or have some design before you just start all typing them in there so that you make sure that you get all of them and that they are all well thought through and that you've looked at each other's user stories to say, are these vague? Are these concrete enough? Go through that SMART terminology to make sure they're specific and measurable, etc. Because that's what I will be looking for when I look over them. Yeah, the scenarios document your acceptance criteria, and the user stories document the features that are to be in the project. You can write tests directly from those scenarios as you're thinking about what should I be testing. If you can go back to your scenarios and figure, let's just go back and take a look at what tests would you write for this particular set of scenarios. It's very easy to see that this is almost in testing language. Set up the unit test by setting up being on the home page. Whatever it takes to navigate, to log in with some test account and be on the home page, that's prior work that you need to do before you start your assertions. When I add new movie, that should be embedded, that's a line in your test to assert that when I do this, then I am here. That's almost exactly testing language. So it's really easy to go back and see. So in scenarios, you will use given as your preconditions, especially if you're familiar with that terminology. How we'll do this in more detail and talk about your preconditions are what has to be true by the time your test starts. The test is only valid if the preconditions are met. For instance, you don't want to test that your linked list exists before you have allocated memory for your linked list. So the precondition says what needs to be true before this test can run, or before this test's acceptance or rejection has validity. When is just an event. This can be an event handler that handles it, or some kind of action that the user takes. So usually it is some kind of event or action. And then represents the expected post conditions. So if the preconditions are true and the event happens, then the post conditions should be true. And that is how I recommend writing all of your tests. You set it up with the preconditions to be in that slice of reality where the test applies, do the thing that you're testing, and then check to see if the result is what you expect, given that you were in, the preconditions were true and you executed the action. And you can use and or but to extend the then this and this and this and this, etc. If you find that your scenario is 20 lines long, it's probably multiple scenarios. Questions on any of that? So I am only looking at user stories. It will be up to you to convert those into scenarios, but I will be looking at the rubric for, actually, let's just go over the rubric real quick, because I think there's value in that. So if we go to the modules of our canvas and we look at the Sprint 1 rubric. Did I only reveal the first part of this? Yes, I did. Excellent. Well, that helps me to know that I should go to this and reveal the rest of them because it had to be in components. All right, so first few is a look at the user stories. This is the exact process that I will go through for it zooms in everything except for that, since it is an image. There we go, that'll do it. So user stories themselves, I'll be looking at the associated features. And for Sprint 1 only, I gave you those requirements. Those requirements, each one of them should map to some kind of user story. And the reason I give it to you is so that you don't have to think too much about, are these complete the first time? I will not be giving you that moving forward. There will just be some verbal, here's what I would like you to do, and you will need to convert that into the associated user stories. But for your first practice with that, I really want you to have, here are the requirements. You can easily see, well, that's a feature. What's the user story? How do I encapsulate that in user story language? So these should be gimme points this first sprint, because you look at the features and you write smart user stories for them. This is for your Git branching. I'm going to look at your commit history. Note that even if you undo some things in Git, that commit history and your branching history is stored. So if you make mistakes on your Git branching, there will be ways for me to see that. So this is just looking at, what is the state of your Git flow? Are you creating branches from the right place? Are feature branches being merged directly into dev? Are you merging feature branches into feature branches? That's not great. Are you committing directly to main? That's terrible. Are you committing directly to dev? That's terrible. It should be, you should be committing everything to a feature branch that's been branched off of dev, wait till that feature is complete, merge it back to dev, and at the very end of the sprint, make one merge back to main. So that's what I'll be looking for in things like this Git branches outcome. Using GitHub issues to track your tasks, that is your Kanban board, and we'll talk about exactly what that is in the very next slide deck that we go through. But I'll be looking for updates to and using this as your GitHub issues as your task list. I expect every task to not just be the description of the task, but also associated time logging. So you're going to annotate each one of those tasks with about how long you think it will take. Is it a small thing, a medium thing, or a large thing? And then just associated time logging on that. Code documentation readability, I'll be looking at the actual code that you submit, how readable is it? And I absolutely love the verbiage in this. How willing would I be to join your team? Full points, I would join your team instantly. This seems like fun. This code looks great. And on the other hand, I could join your team, but I wouldn't want to. Or I can't understand your code at all. Whether this works or not, I can't see why. In a reasonable amount of time. So that's the first few. Part 2 of the Sprint 1 rubric is for the actual design. So the design of your code. What design process did you go through? Do you have any design documents for me to look at that are on your GitHub? To say, here was what the design was, here's what the implementation was. So how well does this break down? Did you haphazardly put all of this together? Does it look like there was a plan going into this? Or did everyone just kind of go off on their own and do whatever and it's spaghetti code and it just kind of works?
What if that's like the name of your team, Spaghetti Mafia? What if that's like part of the brain?
Then you're doing a great job of adhering to your name and a terrible job of adhering to the class requirements. Then I'll be looking at your README. How easy is it following your README to set up and use your application? Have you guided the end user through the setup and usage of your application? Or do I have to use my technical knowledge to run your program? The more technical knowledge I have to draw on, I love simulating this. I've gone through a couple of improv courses, so I just put myself in a mindset of a really dumb character technologically, like someone's grandpa, someone who sits down and is like, this is a mouse, and I try to use your application. I'm a very logical, but very technologically inept person. And I see how well that goes. There are points for the client meeting. So 2 weeks from yesterday, you will be meeting with Tony Espinoza, our client, and going over that. So I have zoomed in on this particularly well. But yeah, that client meeting is looking for professionalism. You'll be demoing your project in a professional way and getting feedback from that. I'll be looking for professionalism throughout. Are you taking notes? Do you present yourself and your project in a reasonably professional way? I'm not looking for what you are wearing. I'm looking more so for your demeanor, your interactions with the client. Are you using technical lingo? Are you showing nervous habits as you do this? Do you seem like a professional interacting, or do you seem like a nervous student who is showing off their project for the first time to someone who is scary? It should be an interaction that you have with a client, not something that is, be as professional as you can in that interaction. Finally, we get to, not finally, but on this document, we get to the actual points for implementing the features that were asked of you. What percentage of those were done? So you see that you only lose 3 out of 100 points if you implement 82% of the features that are required. You can get up to 94 out of 100 points. That's still an A. If you get 60% of the required features working, as long as you do everything else well. Finally, Discord activity. I'll just do a quick pass over channels to see how much communication is happening on Discord. So you should not have outside communication metrics that you are using to communicate about this group. If you have your own Discord that everyone is part of that is not this Discord, I've had that happen in past versions of this class. It just seems like nothing happened the entire sprint. Like, oh, we have a separate Discord that we've been communicating in. I can't see that. I can't see that what processes you're going through, how good your communication is. So try to keep communication to that Discord. Pair programming, I'll be looking for that in your meeting and time logs to see to what extent are you working together on this. So I'll be looking for some pair programming. I don't expect everyone to always be working in pairs, but I do expect you to go through that pair programming process multiple times per sprint, multiple times per person per sprint. And then meeting logs, I'll just be looking again to make sure that meetings are happening. Discord activity is separate from meetings that are being held to go over where are we, what do we need to be prioritizing, what are we doing?
Our group for some reason, I haven't discussed this yet, so this is purely hypothetical right now. If we decide for more physical interaction, like in the same room, discussing things on our laptops and such like that.
Yeah.
How do we log that time or?
Just say met in person, who, list the names, you can just say everyone and then say from time to time.
Okay.
Or something of the sort, and that'll be a log for that. But yeah, you should also be logging in-person meetings. Even if 2 or 3 of you are meeting in person to do that, that is a meeting, you should log those, even if not everyone is there, log that meeting.
Let's say hypothetically the group can't ever meet in person. Do we set up a time just to all be on the same general Discord channel?
Yep.
And log that as a meeting?
Yep. Yeah, does not have to be in person, any remote meeting, any time that you spend, if it's, unless it's actively pair programming, that's not a meeting, that's more of an implementation. But any time that you're getting together and talking about the project, that is a meeting, it should be in your logs.
So how are you tracking pair programming stuff, especially if it's not done on the Discord, like if that is done in person?
Yeah,
You might never see them in the pair programming, but like they're always pair programming.
yeah,
How
so
do you track that?
put that in meeting, or put meetings in meetings, put pair programming in time logs, or one or the other. I'll just be looking for, document that pair programming that happens somehow. But differentiate how you log meetings from how you log pair programming, so that I can see that both are occurring. I know it's kind of overkill to be logging absolutely everything you're doing, that's kind of annoying, but from my perspective, it's really the only way for me to verify that you're undergoing that process. Since I can't be a fly on the wall, nor should I be a fly on the wall on all of your projects and all of your meetings. Questions on the rubric, how this is going to be graded? So very process focused. A lot of these are very easy points to get. You just have to remember and think to do them as part of that process. Only 15 points are the actual features. All right, back to what I want to go into Agile and talk about Agile development and the difference between how things have historically been done and what is the Agile method, what is the Agile development process. This is, if you go into a position, an interview for a position in software engineering, I guarantee this will show up. If you go to a career fair and talk to any company, they will be talking to you about what is your Agile experience, and being able to talk to them about Agile is something that anyone will want worth their brain. So it comes from the original Agile Manifesto in 2001. The basic idea is that project management is done through the concept of scrums, which we will also talk about. And then an engineering practice that more aligns with what we're going to talk about next, extreme programming, which is like repeated waterfall, but to an extreme. The idea of more daily builds, or the fact that there's an always online, always working version of the product, and that working version is as close to the development branch as it can be. There's not a significant amount of development that happens before it's caught up. There's a little bit of development, caught up, a little bit of development, caught up. And that's more the extreme programming methodology. But we're going to incrementally build our software in short iterations, which is why in this course we have 2-week sprints. They're very fast. That 2 weeks goes by before you even realize it. So the fact that there are additional technical requirements that may require you to really gut and rework your entire code base and how it is laid out and how it is designed, there is a significant amount to do in each one of those sprints, but it won't seem like your program changes drastically over any 2-week period. There'll be a cool new feature, but you're not showing something that is completely different from last time. We have a team that is meant to be cross-functional. So people have individual requirements within that, but you might not just be a developer. You might be a developer here and a tester here and a scrum master for a particular small group. So it's meant to be that the process is divided into its components, but people can developers can plug and play, especially in smaller companies where they are needed because they know how to do all of these things. But you do have defined roles within your project for exactly what you need to be doing. So the product owner, that's going to be me this time. I am driving from a business perspective. I want to make sure that the client is happy. So you can think of that as my role. I will define what the requirements are. I will prioritize the requirements. That's why I am dictating what is in a particular sprint. Here is what we want to deliver to the client. These 4 times we're going to deliver something to the client. Determine the release date. I set when those sprints are due. I will be leading planning meetings, and I'm going to be simulating that through the use of our labs. As we go through those design meetings in those labs, I will be doing the product owners' planning meetings. That's the equivalent of those planning meetings. And then accepting and rejecting the work of each iteration. We're going to show this to the client during the client meeting, but the TA and I are going to actually be grading each sprint on how well does this work map to the requirements, the functional requirements that were set forth. So product owner, my role. Scrum Master, you can talk amongst yourselves. Those who are particularly good at organization or leadership make excellent Scrum Masters. They will be looking at cooperation across those roles, helping to identify what needs to be done right now and helping to prioritize that. Looking over everyone's scrums on a daily basis and identifying who is blocked, where are they blocked, who do I know that I can connect them with. It's not always the Scrum Master, but I know you're really good at this and you're really good at this. You're blocked on this thing that this person's really good at. You should get in touch. Looking at the times that are available, you're both available at 7 p.m. What if we set up a meeting for 7 p.m. today? Did that work for both of you? That kind of work works really well for those who love organization and are good at keeping track of that. Let's see, I was going to say something else. Oh yeah, checking to make sure that every group member is doing their daily scrums. You can ping each other to say, hey, I noticed it's 10 p.m. and you haven't posted today's scrum yet. Please make sure you do that. Yeah.
What does the word scrum mean? Where does that come from?
It's I forget where it comes from. Does anyone know off the top of their head where it comes from?
Is it a rugby term?
It might be.
Sounds offensive.
Yeah, it really is just a daily check-in. And that can either, in our case, it's going to be a post, but usually it is a quick 15-minute meeting with rapid fire updates at the beginning of a workday. So for us, it's going to be by midnight on a particular day, everyone posts where they are. And that way, when you wake up and start work on the project the next day, you have a sense of where everyone was at the end of the last day. So we're kind of more so doing it sometime in that 24-hour period. I'll just be looking for, there's a post before midnight or between each midnight to midnight block where there's a class meeting on that day. But again, I highly recommend doing those scrums outside of those days. And then developers and testers, unfortunately, there's kind of no way to assign one person. You're the developer. You're going to do all of the implementation work for this. That's not really fair to anyone. So you're all going to be taking on the development work to some extent. You're all going to be taking on the testing work to some extent. So that is not a role that should be assigned within these groups. That's something that you should be taking on for any code that you are contributing. Make sure that you're developing it, but do pair program. And then make sure that you are thinking about testing. And later Later on, there will be testing requirements for these sprints. There is no current grade item for tests being written, but you might want to start thinking in terms of writing tests for functionality. When those do become a requirement for the course, that you're ready to plug that in play. Any unfinished user stories, if I put any functional requirements to you and it's just a feature that you don't have time for, they're kept in a backlog. And you will get to those as you can. It should be given a rough size estimate and use some kind of relative scale. So sometimes this is done in small, medium, large. Sometimes it's done in very small, small, medium, large, very large. But use some kind of relative scale for that. It could be in 30-minute segments if you really want to try to put a time to it. But I often find that especially undergraduate computer science students have no clue how long implementing something is going to take them or someone else when they don't know that person's history and how comfortable and familiar they are with tools that you might be comfortable and familiar with. So make sure that as part of your design and planning process, you're actually agreeing on the extent to which these tasks should be labeled based on this relative scale. It's not just one person who's going to go in and say, I think this is small, I think this is large. Let's give this person these 2 smaller tasks, this person this 1 larger task. You should all be agreeing on the size of these tasks. And yes, so stories are done by implementing and creating these tasks. So each story converted into scenarios, converted into a collection of tasks. If you're making stories for a future iteration, then don't break it down into tasks until you're ready to start working on it. That way, when you do that process, you have the most information that you possibly could have. When you complete a task or move it into a done portion of a Kanban board, it gets a green check mark, whatever it is that you are going to designate this task is done. All tasks are completed within that. That means all development is complete. All testing is written for it and tested to make sure that this feature is complete to the best ability you can at the moment. Any acceptance tests that you've written for the project as a whole are running and green lighted. That means that you didn't break any of the acceptance tests by adding this functionality to the program. There are no open defects. That means there's no bug report that is anything associated with that component. And then you've talked to the product owner, me, and or in your client meeting, and the client has said, yes, I like this. Then that gets complete in terms of a check mark. It is done. So I would say utilize some of that client meeting time to get feedback on any user interface implementation. In your head, in the background, because you don't want to use technical lingo with the client, you'll be asking them using client-focused language, does this work for you? And you'll use that to validate the underlying structure. All right, that data structure seems to be working well for the client's needs based on the user story type of language that the client gave me in that meeting. Now I can go back and say, this task was implemented using this structure. All right, now we're done with that. We can not think about it anymore. It's ready to go. It's part of the final product. So that is kind of your workflow. User stories, scenarios, tasks, in progress, done once all of these are done. Yeah.
The client meeting is happening a couple days before the sprint is due.
Yeah.
Then
About
we're not
4
having a
days.
client meeting about the next sprint until the next
The-
sprint's almost.
The client meeting will include, great, here's what I want to see by our next client meeting. That'll be 2 weeks from then. So you'll have a week and a half of development. So yeah, I guess the total flow is you'll start sprint 1, implement everything to get feedback from the client. A week and a half into sprint 1, you'll have that client meeting. You'll have 4 days to finish any feedback that the client gives you. But during that client meeting, you'll also say, here's what I'm looking for the next sprint 2 client meeting. Here's the features and functionality. Don't start on that until you are super happy with sprint 1 and it's done and due. But then you will move on to implementing the next features that the client mentions in that client meeting. for sprint 2, and then a week and a half into that, you'll meet again. That'll be your chance to get feedback on what they requested during the last client meeting. Does that make sense to everyone? Seem like a reasonable flow? It's the best we can do in a 10-week course. It flies by super fast. All right, at any point in this, we have an associated backlog that is prioritized. So what is high priority, medium priority, low priority? You should think of, for this course, high priority is anything that will be useful to get information from the client in that client meeting. So whatever prerequisite tasks you need to have implemented so that the client can talk to you about the user interface, the usability, the design. All of that should be done by the time the client meeting happens. If there are a few annoying bugs at that point, try to fix the bugs that affect that process. If there is a bug that just crashes your program in a very weird side case, fix that in those 4 days between the client meetings and the end of sprint. Because even if the client does things that hits that exact crash, you can say, we're aware of this, we know exactly what to do. We were prioritizing making sure that we could get good feedback from you from this to make sure that by the end of the sprint, we can give you the best product that we can. How does sprint planning happen? We've started to do this process a little bit at the end of lab yesterday. Which user stories are going to go from the backlog into the sprint will define exactly what you plan to get done. I will usually do this for you. Here's what I require for you from this sprint. So you don't have to use the backlog too much. Whenever the client gives you some new functionality, it should go into your backlog. By the time you have the next client meeting, you should have implemented as much of that as you can. Prioritized by how useful it is to get feedback from the client during that meeting. In general, though, you'll determine how much of it you can commit to complete. And that becomes the definition of the sprint. You can imagine being out in industry and the product isn't done until the product is done. The client doesn't say drop dead deadline is this the very first day they give it to you. They don't know how big it's going to be. It hasn't been designed yet. But you start to get a sense of how much can I reasonably get done in this sprint period. And so this is how you'll communicate that with your group and is an important part of that design. And during a sprint, that backlog is frozen. You do not dive into that backlog for any reason. You should fix bugs. You should be searching for bugs. You should be making the current version of the program work. If you've done all of that and you just feel like it's absolutely perfect, there's still work that can be done, additional tests that can be written, thinking about writing further acceptance tests for this, just don't dive into that sprint backlog. And you'll get a sense of how big that backlog should be with experience. All right, we talked a bit about what daily scrums are going to look like, also called stand-ups. So every day, some kind of status meeting occurs. In practice, this is done in person. Meeting should always start on time. Everyone should always be there at the start of that meeting. Those who have some kind of speaking role should always be there, but in general, even if you're just a stakeholder and not part of the contribution to this, you can attend those meetings just to get a sense of what is the status of this project. Oftentimes, project managers will attend daily scrums of those teams because it's useful from my perspective to know how things are going. This is why you're posting these to Discord so that I can take a look at what's the state of the project, what are you stuck on? So that your teammates can see exactly that. It's just communication. Meeting lasts at most 15 minutes. We all hate meetings, and meetings should be run efficiently. If we haven't read about that in the book yet, we are going to be. And remember that chapter 2 is being discussed on Monday as well. So go ahead and read chapter 2 of the book as well. Forgot to mention that at the beginning of class. The 3 questions: what have you done since your last scrum or stand-up? What are you planning to do between this and your next stand-up? And what is preventing you from finishing your goals, if anything? It is perfectly okay to say nothing. And it's also perfectly okay to dive into a reasonable amount of detail, but especially if these are being done in person, you should be thinking about communicating that block efficiently. If you need to have a sidebar later where you meet with the relevant people to get rid of that block, you're communicating, I am blocked due to this reason. You're not going into the entire technical, here's what I've been doing, here's exactly what I've been running into, here's the problem, let me bring it up to you and show it to you. Have a sidebar after that meeting so that people who can't help you with that are off being productive and not sitting here watching you talk about something they don't care about and can't help you. So efficient meetings, super important. We won't be doing this, but in larger companies, you can have a scrum of scrums where the scrum master from one scrum will meet in another level and talk about, here's what my team is working on. And have a 15-minute meeting that talks about summarizing the scrums that took place from that. The developers inside of that smaller scrum don't necessarily attend the scrum of scrums, but clusters of teams discussing the work, the overlap, the integration. Sometimes that scrum of scrums can be a larger meeting of all of those teams, depending on whether that integration is needed, whether all the developers need to be there to hear what is this integration going to look like. Sometimes it's just the project manager so they can talk to their team about how the integration is going to work. Additional questions that are asked in scrum of scrums. What has your team done since the last scrum of scrums? What is the team going to do before we meet again for a scrum of scrums? Anything slowing your team down from being productive? And what can you envision that you are doing that could affect the other teams in some way, shape, or form that they should be aware of that might become part of their workflow? Are you shutting down a particular server for maintenance? Are you the only team who uses that server? Should other people be aware that the server won't be available and it's not their code, it's a system-wide shutdown. So it's the kind of the communication that you need to make sure that you can diagnose issues more effectively and efficiently. We have sprint-related meetings. So this is done in our labs. So sprint planning, any sprint review, any kind of oh my gosh, it's a term. The last reading, very end of it. Discussing what went wrong. It is that the concept of a retrospective, but whatever that word was. Sorry?
Postmortem.
Yeah, the postmortem. That's the word I'm searching for. So yeah, it's the time to go through what went wrong in the last sprint. What are we doing this sprint? Let's plan it out. Let's make sure that this goes more smoothly than the last one. Yeah. So recommended approach for this class is some mix of a little bit of agile and classical. So each sprint should be multiple passes through waterfall. Generate the project documentation instead of all at the beginning, kind of as you go. And as agile, we'll be doing kind of an extreme programming. We'll talk about that a little bit more on Monday. We'll talk about test-driven development, and you'll start doing that as we start talking about it. You'll be doing consistent code refactoring. That's an important skill to get familiar with. In industry, you'll be joining a project that's not getting off the ground, but there's code that is there. And so you will need to be refactoring code that you didn't necessarily write for a project that's larger in scope than something that you've worked on. We will introduce continuous integration and what that means, as well as the agile. What does that mean in terms of the agile development process? And of course, pair programming. Yeah, questions on that? Yeah.
Are you okay with pair programming in the Discord looking like, hey, I just completed this, would people review it and give the feedback?
Yeah, so that's more of a code review than pair programming, but code reviews will also be required as well. So pair programming is during the implementation. You cannot add any code to the repo without it being code reviewed. So we're setting up the code review requirement that you cannot push code. It flags a code review. And as it flags a code review, someone else is going to have to go in and validate and say, yes, I agree that this code is high enough quality to plug and play with this project. Multiple sets of eyes over a piece of code is way better than a single pair of eyes. Other questions?
For this project, is code review like we're actually going to be changing their code, or will you send them a list of things that you think?
It should be kind of done hopefully in pretty real time, looking over it together. But there is a checklist that I will show in a few days that people can also use to do it asynchronously, if that's the case. And that way you can just get feedback to that person asynchronously.
Should we be doing our scrums this week, or should we start like after we actually start writing code next
Start Monday.
Monday? Okay.
Yeah, first scrum will be Monday. Other questions, other concerns?
Is this slide deck gonna be posted?
Yes, yeah, I'm gonna make a pass over Canvas to make sure that everything is up ahead of tomorrow, and the study guide I will get to you for tomorrow. So remember, you have reading to do, you have a lab to do, you have design to be thinking about. With that much work, don't start writing code yet. Start that next week. I have office hours starting now. If anyone has questions or concerns, I have a personal question.